They say love can strike in the unlikeliest of places, but I never thought it would happen in the middle of a home renovation. My once pristine apartment had turned into a chaotic construction site, and amidst the dust and debris, I found myself consumed by the presence of a man who made the chaos feel like heaven. But what started as passion in the rubble quickly spiraled into something darker: betrayal, temptation, and a discovery that left me questioning everything. This is not just a story about love, it's about what happens when desire blinds you to the truth. My name's Brandon, and at 30 years old, I thought I had everything under control. My career was stable, my social life thriving, and my newly purchased apartment was the cherry on top. Except for one thing: the apartment was a fixer-upper, and the endless noise of drills, the clutter of tools, and the constant presence of strangers in my space was driving me insane. That's when he walked in. His name was Jason, a contractor recommended by a friend. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and effortlessly confident. His sun-kissed blonde hair caught the light as he entered, clipboard in hand. I'd seen attractive men before, but there was something about him, a magnetism that I couldn't ignore. From the moment he started talking about wall reinforcements and flooring options, I could barely concentrate. His deep voice had a calming yet commanding quality that pulled me in. As he gestured to the blueprints, his biceps flexed, his shirt pulling tight against his chest. I was mesmerized, barely registering his words. Despite my inner turmoil, I tried to keep things professional. "You seem to know what you're doing," I said, forcing a polite smile. Jason grinned, flashing a perfect set of teeth. "It's not my first rodeo, but I'll make sure this place feels like home for you." His words felt weighted, but maybe that was just my overactive imagination. Days turned into weeks, and Jason became a constant presence in my life. Every morning he arrived with his team, filling the space with energy and purpose. I started finding excuses to check on the progress, even when I had no reason to. Something about being near him was intoxicating. But it wasn't just Jason. One of his workers, Matt, caught my attention too. Dark-haired, with piercing eyes and a physique that seemed sculpted from marble. Matt was as striking as Jason, if not more so. His quiet demeanor contrasted with Jason's charm, and it intrigued me. I wasn't ready to admit it yet, but something was brewing within me. A storm of emotions I couldn't quite name. What I didn't know was how much that storm would upend my carefully constructed life. The renovation was progressing, but so was my obsession. I spent more time than necessary watching Jason and Matt work, their movements deliberate and efficient. Jason's loud laugh echoed through the apartment, while Matt worked silently, his focus unbreakable. One evening, I decided to bring coffee for the team. Jason thanked me with a wink, his fingers brushing mine as he took the cup. "You're spoiling us," he said, his tone light but with a teasing edge. My stomach flipped, but I laughed it off, pretending his touch didn't send shivers down my spine. Matt, on the other hand, simply nodded as I handed him his cup. His fingers brushed mine too, but instead of the jolt I felt with Jason, this touch was grounding. There was a quiet intensity in his gaze, one that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't before. As the days passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something unsaid hung in the air. Jason's teasing grew more frequent, his proximity lingering a second too long. And Matt? He seemed to watch me when he thought I wasn't looking, his expression unreadable. One night, as I lay in bed, I replayed every interaction in my mind. The glances, the brushes of hands, the tension that felt almost tangible. Was I imagining it all? Or was there something real beneath the surface? I told myself it was ridiculous. They were professionals, here to do a job. But my heart and body refused to listen. I was drawn to them both, and the realization terrified me. The lines between fantasy and reality were blurring, and I was helpless to stop it. Little did I know, the choice I would soon face would be as thrilling as it was devastating. The renovation was supposed to be done weeks ago, but unexpected delays kept stretching the timeline. Part of me was frustrated, but a darker, more secret part of me welcomed the excuse to keep Jason and Matt in my life just a little longer. The truth was, I was in over my head, and I couldn't decide which direction my feelings were pulling me. One Thursday evening, Jason announced that he'd be working late to install the crown molding in the living room. His team had gone home, but he insisted on finishing it alone. "Can't leave the job half done," he said with that signature grin, his blonde hair catching the faint glow of the construction light. I offered to stay and keep him company, my voice casual, though my pulse raced. The apartment was eerily quiet with just the two of us. The rhythmic sound of Jason's hammer echoed through the space as I sat on the edge of a ladder, pretending to scroll through my phone. Every so often I stole glances at him. His movements were confident, each muscle in his back and arms flexing under the fitted t-shirt as he worked. "You've been watching me all day, haven't you?" Jason's voice broke through my thoughts. I froze, unsure if he was teasing or serious. When I looked up, he was staring at me, his blue eyes piercing and unwavering. I scrambled for a response, but he didn't give me the chance. Jason dropped his tools and crossed the room in a few long strides, his gaze locked onto mine. "Brandon, you don't have to pretend you're not interested," he murmured, his voice low and almost daring. The air between us crackled like a live wire. My breath caught as he reached out, his calloused hand brushing against my jawline. "I've seen the way you look at me," he continued, his lips so close I could feel the warmth of his breath. I should have said something. I should have stopped him, or at least pretended I wasn't utterly captivated. But the truth was, I didn't want to stop. Not this time. My heart thundered in my chest as Jason closed the distance, his lips claiming mine in a kiss that was rough and unapologetically dominant. The world around us faded, the dust-covered floors and half-finished walls becoming nothing more than a distant blur. His hands gripped my waist, pulling me closer as the kiss deepened. The scent of sawdust mixed with the faint hint of his cologne, and it was intoxicating. "Are you sure about this?" Jason whispered against my lips, his hands lingering at the hem of my shirt. I nodded, my words failing me in the heat of the moment. And with that, he lifted me effortlessly, pressing me against the unfinished wall. My hands tangled in his hair, and for the first time in years, I let myself go completely. It wasn't just lust. It was raw, unfiltered connection, and it ignited something in me that I hadn't felt in a long time. For that night, the mess of the renovation and the complications of reality didn't matter. All that mattered was us, tangled together in the chaos of what we'd just created. The morning sun filtered through the half-covered windows, casting streaks of light across the dusty floor. I woke up sprawled on the makeshift mattress in what was supposed to become my new living room. The events of the night before played vividly in my mind. Jason's hands, his lips, the way he had taken charge as if he owned the space and me within it. My body still hummed with the memory of it, but as reality set in, so did the weight of what had happened. Jason was already awake, leaning against the unfinished wall with a cup of coffee in hand. His hair was slightly disheveled, and the sight of him so relaxed yet so commanding made my stomach flutter. "Morning," he said, his voice husky but casual, like last night hadn't turned my world upside down. "Morning," I mumbled, sitting up and running a hand through my hair. I couldn't bring myself to meet his gaze for too long, afraid of what I might find there. Would he regret it? Would he pretend it hadn't happened? Jason chuckled, setting his coffee down on a paint-stained table nearby. "Don't overthink it, Brandon," he said, his tone light but with a knowing edge. "Last night was incredible. No need to complicate it." His words should have reassured me, but instead, they left me feeling oddly hollow. Was this just a one-time thing for him? A release of tension after a long day? I nodded, forcing a smile, but the pit in my stomach deepened. As the day went on, Jason seemed entirely unfazed, diving back into his work as if nothing had changed. Meanwhile, I was a mess, constantly replaying every moment, every touch, every word. I couldn't focus on anything else, and it scared me. To make matters more complicated, Matt arrived in the afternoon to assist Jason. His presence, as quiet and composed as ever, suddenly felt suffocating. I couldn't look at him without feeling a pang of guilt, though I hadn't done anything wrong, at least not with him. But there was something about Matt's steady gaze, the way he seemed to see right through me, that made my chest tighten. By the end of the day, I was exhausted. Not from physical labor, but from the emotional roller coaster I'd been riding. As Jason and Matt packed up to leave, Jason gave me a lingering look that sent shivers down my spine. "I'll see you tomorrow," he said, his tone carrying an unspoken promise. I nodded, my heart pounding as he walked out the door. But as I turned to lock up, I caught Matt watching me from the corner of the room. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes held a weight that felt almost accusatory. It was as if he knew everything, and the thought made my skin crawl. The following days were a blur of half-finished renovations and simmering tension. Jason and I shared stolen glances and subtle touches whenever we were alone, but he was careful to keep things professional when the rest of the crew was around. It was thrilling in a way, our little secret, but it was also suffocating. Matt, on the other hand, seemed to grow quieter and more reserved as the days went by. I couldn't tell if it was my imagination or if he truly knew what had happened between Jason and me. His silence was unnerving, and I found myself avoiding him whenever possible. Then, one morning, a new contractor arrived. His name was Kyle, and he was tasked with finishing the tiling in the bathroom, a task Jason's team hadn't gotten around to yet. Kyle was younger than Jason and Matt, probably in his late 20s, with an easy smile and a laid-back demeanor. But what caught my attention immediately was his appearance. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a jawline that could cut glass and dark eyes that seemed to pierce through me. As the week went on, Kyle's presence became impossible to ignore. He was charming and flirtatious, always finding excuses to talk to me or ask for my opinion on his work. At first, I chalked it up to his friendly nature, but soon it became clear that his interest in me wasn't entirely professional. Jason noticed too, though he tried to hide it. I could see the tension in his jaw whenever Kyle was around. One evening, after the crew had left, Jason pulled me aside. "Be careful with him," he said, his tone low and serious. "Why? What's wrong with Kyle?" I asked, genuinely curious. Jason hesitated, his blue eyes narrowing. "Just trust me on this. He's not what he seems. But his warning only made Kyle more intriguing. There was a spark in his eyes, a playful edge to his words that made me feel alive in a way I hadn't before. It was dangerous, I knew, but I couldn't help myself. What I didn't realize was that my growing interest in Kyle would set off a chain of events that none of us could control. A series of choices and betrayals that would leave all of us forever changed. Kyle's presence became an undeniable force in my life. Every time he walked into the room, it felt like the air shifted, charged with an energy I couldn't ignore. His charm was effortless, his jokes perfectly timed, and his smile, oh, that smile made me forget everything else. Jason noticed the way Kyle's attention lingered on me, and his irritation became increasingly difficult to hide. One evening, as Kyle was laying tiles in the bathroom, Jason confronted me in the kitchen. "What are you doing with him?" he asked, his voice low but tense. I froze, unsure of how to respond. "I'm not doing anything," I said, though the defensive edge in my voice betrayed me. Jason stepped closer, his blue eyes narrowing. "Don't play dumb, Brandon. I see the way he looks at you, and I see the way you look back." His words stung because they weren't entirely wrong, but instead of admitting the truth, I pushed back. "You don't own me, Jason. Whatever happened between us was..." "Was what?" Jason interrupted, his voice rising. "A one-time thing? Something meaningless?" I couldn't meet his gaze, and my silence was answers enough. Jason scoffed, running a hand through his blonde hair. "You're playing with fire, Brandon. Don't say I didn't warn you." The tension between us hung thick in the air, but before I could respond, Kyle appeared in the doorway. "Everything okay in here?" he asked, his tone casual, but his eyes flicking between Jason and me. Jason forced a tight smile. "Yeah, we're fine." He shot me one last look before brushing past Kyle and leaving the room. Kyle raised an eyebrow, his lips curving into a smirk. "Trouble in paradise?" he teased, leaning casually against the doorframe. I laughed nervously, trying to deflect. "There's no paradise, just a lot of unfinished renovations." But Kyle wasn't fooled. He stepped closer, his dark eyes locking onto mine. "If you ever need a break from all this..." His voice trailed off, the implication clear. My heart raced, and for a moment, I forgot how to breathe. The rational part of me screamed to walk away, but the pull of his presence was too strong. I nodded, barely managing a whispered, "Thanks." As Kyle returned to his work, I felt the weight of my choices pressing down on me. I was walking a dangerous line, and deep down, I knew it could only end badly. A week later, the line I'd been trying so hard not to cross was obliterated. Kyle stayed late to finish the tiling in the bathroom, and once again, I found myself alone in the apartment with him. The atmosphere was electric, the tension between us impossible to ignore. Kyle worked shirtless, his tanned, muscular torso glistening with a thin layer of sweat. I tried to focus on anything else, but my gaze kept drifting back to him. "Like what you see." Kyle's voice startled me, pulling me out of my thoughts. He turned to face me, a mischievous grin playing on his lips. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. Instead, I nodded, my cheeks burning with embarrassment. Kyle took a step closer, closing the distance between us. "You don't have to be shy, Brandon," he said, his voice low and teasing. "I've seen the way you look at me." Before I could respond, he reached out, his fingers brushing against my arm. The touch sent a jolt through me, and before I knew it, I was leaning into him, our lips crashing together in a kiss that was both urgent and desperate. Unlike Jason, whose kisses were commanding and intense, Kyle's were playful and teasing, igniting a different kind of fire within me. His hands roamed my body, and I felt myself letting go completely, surrendering to the moment. As we moved together amidst the tools and debris, I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. Jason's warning echoed in my mind, but it was quickly drowned out by the sound of Kyle's laughter and the feel of his hands on my skin. When it was over, Kyle leaned back, a satisfied smirk on his face. "I knew you couldn't resist," he said, his tone dripping with confidence. I didn't respond, too consumed by the whirlwind of emotions coursing through me. But as I watched him gather his tools and leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just made a mistake I couldn't undo. The next morning, Jason arrived earlier than usual, his demeanor colder than I'd ever seen it. He barely spoke to me, his focus entirely on the work. I tried to act normal, but the guilt was eating me alive. By midday, it became clear that something had shifted. Jason pulled me aside while the rest of the crew was on break. "Did you think I wouldn't find out?" he asked, his voice low but seething with anger. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. "Jason, don't," he snapped, cutting me off. "You couldn't even wait until the renovation was finished before jumping into bed with him." The shame was overwhelming. But before I could respond, Jason shook his head and walked away. The look of betrayal in his eyes was something I would never forget. That evening, as I sat alone in the now finished apartment, I realized the mess I had made. I had chased desire without thinking about the consequences, and now I was left with nothing but regret. Weeks passed, and Jason's team finished the renovation. He barely spoke to me during the final days, and when the job was done, he left without so much as a goodbye. Kyle, on the other hand, continued to flirt and tease, but the spark I had once felt for him had faded. His charm now felt shallow, his confidence bordering on arrogance. One evening, as I sat in my newly renovated living room, I realized the truth. I had been chasing fleeting moments of pleasure, using Jason and Kyle as distractions from my own emptiness. When Kyle suggested starting a new project, another excuse to keep him around, I declined. "I think I need to figure some things out on my own," I told him, my voice firm. He didn't argue, just shrugged and left, leaving me alone in the apartment that now felt far too big and empty. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to sit with the discomfort of my choices. I had lost Jason, hurt Kyle, and most importantly, I had betrayed myself. But amidst the rubble of my mistakes, I found a small spark of hope. The renovation might be over, but my journey was just beginning. Dust, Desire, and Deception is a story about the thrill of passion, the weight of choices, and the lessons we learn from our mistakes. Brandon's journey is one of desire clashing with responsibility, showing how fleeting pleasures can leave lasting scars. Yet, in the end, it's also about growth, about realizing that even in moments of regret, there's a chance to rebuild and move forward. Hey, did you enjoy this story? Let me know in the comments what you thought and what rating you'd give to today's gay story. Your rating and opinion are super important to help me bring you more hot, real, and engaging stories every single day here. I can't wait to hear from you.